My name is Anurin Helen, and I'm 32 years old. In cybersecurity, the loudest breaches aren't the ones that blare alarms. They're the quiet permissions you never noticed you granted. People work the same way. The catastrophe rarely explodes out of nowhere. It seeps in through a setting you trusted, a gesture you wanted to believe. I met Adrian in Bogota 2 years ago. I was there for a 3-month contract with a banking group, patching audit trail gaps, mapping attack surfaces that never sleep. He was the trilingual admin assigned to our project. Spanish, English, Portuguese. Each sentence held like a note he could tune to the room. He was handsome in a studied way, but what disarmed me wasn't his face. It was the care he took with small things. Coffee orders remembered, decks formatted like he'd pulled thread through each slide. He laughed easily, but he never laughed at people. That felt rare. We started with work, graduated to dinners, then a Sunday morning market where he haggled for mangoes while explaining why certain vendors salted their knives for luck. When my contract ended, the question wasn't if we would try long distance. It was how. For a year, we rotated. I'd fly down for a week. He'd fly up for the 2 weeks his tourist visa allowed. We were adults, stubborn and optimistic. We mistook the stubbornness for proof. He wasn't what people warned me to fear. He had money of his own, a remote job he'd carved into something flexible and real. He'd split bills, insist on paying the next one, and once, when my flight was canceled and I cried in a bathroom stall with the worst fluorescent lighting in the hemisphere, he listened and didn't try to fix it. "You're allowed to be tired," he said on the phone. "I'll be here when you land." When we started talking about a life in the same city, I suggested what the government suggests, the Fiancé path that would bring him to Chicago with the expectation that we'd marry within the window. He hesitated, carefully, beautifully. He said he didn't want me to think he was using me for a future he hadn't earned. He wanted to protect what I'd built. He asked, quietly, about a prenup. I loved him for that. I loved him for the way his hands steadied on my lower back, crossing a busy street on Calle 85, like I was something breakable and important. He moved to Chicago that March. We set a June date. 90 days sounds like a heist movie countdown when it's not your life. When it is, it's just a series of mornings. Build the guest list. Debate a string quartet versus a playlist. Figure out how to say we when you've been a me for a decade. If there was a red flag, it wore the right colors. He was detached about the wedding, sure, but I told myself I was marrying a person, not a centerpiece. He said, "I trust your taste," and kissed my forehead like a promise. He wanted his own apartment until the wedding. I said that was healthy. Boundaries are a virtue until they become a vault. 3 weeks before the date, his older sister Catalina arrived from Bogota. If Adrian was a warm taper candle, Catalina was a pilot flame. Smaller, hotter, impossible to ignore. She watched a room like she could hear the floorboards. At first I chalked it up to jet lag, to being protective. When your family crosses an ocean to endorse your choices, they reserve the right to stare for a minute. 2 nights before the wedding, we hosted the rehearsal dinner in a private room with windows that made Chicago glitter like a promise it intended to keep. My parents came, my brother, a couple of cousins. His side was smaller. His parents, a cousin named Michaela who lived in Miami and wore a red dress like she was allergic to being ignored, and Catalina. I stepped out to take a client call I couldn't ignore. Someone's staging server had started behaving like a haunted house. When I came back, conversations had shifted into comfortable clusters. Adrian had his hand on my chair. Catalina had her eyes on me. She waited until he turned to talk to my mother about flowers. She leaned in, her voice threaded with an accent so precise it felt like a scalpel. "He's only marrying you for the green card," she said. "He has a wife back home." I felt the floor tilt. 5 degrees, then 10. I kept my mouth neutral the way you do when you're flattening a firewall rule that shouldn't be there. "What?" I said, friendly, like she'd asked me to pass the salt. She slid something into my hand, a folded note. "Her name is Rafaela Mendez. They've been married 4 years, she said, still smiling at the room like we were discussing the weather. The plan is to divorce you after he gets residency. Later she'll join. He is also with Michaela." A beat. I have proof. My face did not betray me. My pulse did. It thudded like hard boots up a hallway. I excused myself. Another call, another emergency, and walked to the bathroom with the same careful steps I take when carrying boiling water. I locked the stall, unfolded the note, a Colombian number, an email address, a handwritten line. I'm sorry. I couldn't let you stand there without the truth. I leaned my head against the cool metal. Competing logics fought it out in my skull. Why would she lie? Why wait until now? Why bring a match to this room and not care who burned? Back at the table, I became a camera taking stills of my life. Adrian laughing with my brother about the Cubs. My mother nodding through an anecdote she'd already told twice. Catalina's hands folded, knuckles pale. Michaela, across the room, watching the door as though someone was late for her. I did not drink. I did not breathe more than necessary. I can map a network from a small set of anomalies. I can map a person the same way. I drove Adrian to his place after, telling him I had an early meeting. He kissed my cheek, said, "Tomorrow the suit, yes?" I nodded. He walked inside with the ease of someone who never expects a lock to click behind him. My apartment felt like it belonged to a stranger whose life I had been staging. I opened my laptop and typed Rafaela Mendez Bogota into the bar like a prayer I expected to go unanswered. The answers arrived immediately. A public profile with a winter palette wedding photo cropped just enough to pretend the groom didn't matter. A photo from 2019. Adrian and Rafaela at a cousin's party. Not affectionate, but familiar the way people get when they've shared 1,000 breakfasts. A different account. Slight variation on Adrian's name that he'd never mentioned, full of travel photos that overlapped his trips with mine like mocking transparencies. In one picture, he and Rafaela wore rings that flashed the way metals do under bad fluorescent lights. I messaged a colleague in our Bogota office, something benign wrapped around something pointed. Do you know if Adrian ever married? The reply didn't dress up. Si. Rafaela. Import business in the family. Why? It was after midnight when I stopped pretending this could be anything else. At 7 a.m., I called an immigration attorney. I laid out what I knew and the timing we were in. I asked the question no one wants to ask. What happens if I do nothing and someone decides I knew? The answer was straightforward and cold. Collaborating, even passively, in a fraudulent marriage isn't just a bad story you can laugh about later. It's a crime with teeth. Document everything, the attorney said. Contact the agency with counsel, and do not, under any circumstances, marry him. I stared at the calendar square around Saturday like it might confess it was a trick of light. Then I dialed the Colombian number on the note. It rang long enough to become a threat, then clicked. A woman's voice, low and rough, said hello, like she'd been awake all night. Is this Rafaela Mendez? I asked. A pause. Who is calling? My name is Aniran Helen, I said. I'm scheduled to marry your husband in 2 days. Silence. Then a laugh, so humorless it could have cracked glass. What do you want? She said. The truth, I said, and a recording of it. I hit the button on my phone that made everything that followed a matter of record. The recording caught the small sounds first, the drag of breath through someone else's morning, a cup set down on a counter, an indecision. You want the truth? Rafaela said at last. Fine. We were married 4 years ago at San Antonio de Padua. If you look, the photos are there, just not where strangers search. He promised me the Chicago marriage was temporary, that paperwork is a bridge, not a home. What exactly was this plan? I asked, steadying the pen in my hand, though I wasn't writing, just giving my body a job that wasn't shaking. She exhaled. He marries you, gets residency, keeps you sweet until the conditions are removed. Then you separate. Later I come on a spousal petition. He likes calling it optimization. He thinks that sounds clean. My throat clicked. Why are you telling me this now, 2 days before my wedding? Silence widened, then narrowed to a point. Because he's stupid, she said, and greedy, and because he is not sleeping alone in your country. The woman in Miami? Michaela? She is not his cousin. Rafaela's voice cut like piano wire. She is his ex, his always. The word always sat there like wet ash. In the rehearsal room, Michaela's red dress had been a small sun. I had not recognized a flare for what it was. Do you have proof? I asked. I have bank transfers, she said. Screenshots, chat logs, photos I took of his laptop when he forgot to close it. I did not plan to become the archivist of my own humiliation. A bitter, humorless laugh. But here we are. We agreed to exchange documents. I gave her my counsel's email. She gave me dates, overlapping holidays, the times he'd been out with cousins, and the faces that appeared in those hours. I thanked her because there's nothing else to do when someone hands you the exact shape of your ruin and it fits. After I hung up, my apartment seemed overfurnished by ghosts. I opened a secure folder and began to collect. The screenshots already on my desktop, the public posts I'd saved, the metadata I'd quietly sucked from a photo of Adrian's family party and watched line up with a Miami tower I could identify by the cut of its glass. At 9:01, my attorney called back. "We'll prepare the report," she said, practical in a way that felt like scaffolding. "You're not obligated to confront him to be fair. You're obligated not to step into a crime." "I know," I said. The words felt like a new language I could speak but didn't want to think in. I made a list. Document everything, timelines, screenshots, logs. Check recording legality. I'd already done that. Illinois one party, Columbia two. The attorney confirmed what I'd found. Notify venue, emergency cancellation clause. Inform guests, minimal detail, promise more later. Do not be alone with him. Change locks after. To keep my hands from shaking, I put on coffee, then never drank it. I ran a diff tool on 2 versions of Adrian's alternate Instagram bio I'd scraped the night before, as if the microscopic change between Bogota, Chicago, and Bogota, Chicago could tell me something about a person who uses punctuation like a disguise. My inbox chimed. Rafaela had sent a zip file. Inside, a JPEG of a marriage certificate, bank statements with transfers labeled in a language that didn't bother to hide, chat exports with timestamps that braided neatly with my calendar. I dropped them into a timeline like pins on a map, each pin threaded to a night I had fallen asleep smiling at my phone. I texted Catalina, "Can we talk? Not on WhatsApp, Signal, or in person." She replied in under a minute with a cafe address and the line, "I didn't want to say it there. I needed you to see I wasn't trying to hurt you." I arrived first and sat in the back where the light makes secrets look softer. When she came in, she looked 10 years older than she had at the rehearsal dinner. That's the weight of choosing a person over your family's version of love. "Thank you," I said, before anything else. She nodded, eyes fixed on the table. I found messages on his laptop. He left it open. Rafaela sent him the photos he demanded she take, of her, of documents. He said he needed to reassure the investor. Catalina's lip curled. "Is that you? The investor?" I swallowed, apparently. "He wasn't always like this," she said, and the way the past tense landed told me she was right and also lying to survive it. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. She looked up. "He will tell you it's cultural, that everyone does it. He will make your decency the problem." "He tried," I said. He reframed everything as a transaction before I even confronted him, like I knew. "You didn't," she said, quietly fierce. "That's why I told you." I slid my phone across, played Rafaela's recorded confirmation through low volume. Catalina listened with the kind of stillness that draws all the motion in a room into itself. When it ended, she pressed her lips together. "Then you cannot marry him," she said. "Do you have a plan?" "I do," I said. "Cancel the venue, notify guests, file formally through counsel, then confront him with counsel copied on every word." "Good," she said. "He will come to you. He will cry. Then he will threaten. Then he will tell you a story where none of this is his fault." "I'm prepared," I said. I didn't feel prepared, but I said it like I would say, "The system is patched," because saying it could make it true. We parted with a hug that felt like shaking hands on a terrible truce with reality. At home, I dialed the venue. The coordinator had the voice of someone who'd already seen too much. I cited the fraud or criminal discovery clause like it was a spell. She paused, then said, "I'm so sorry. We can process a partial refund. I'll email you." Grief punched through me at the smallest thing, the empty chair that would not hold my father while he pretended not to cry. I drafted an email to our guests. "Due to a significant deception discovered, the wedding on Saturday is canceled. Thank you for understanding and respecting my privacy as I handle legal matters. I will share more when appropriate." I pressed send and watched the little airplane icon fly toward every person who had RSVP'd yes to a life that no longer existed. Then I called him. "Hey," Adrian answered on the second ring, cheerful, morning warm. "Suit fitting today, remember? I can meet you at—" "We need to talk," I said. "Coffee shop on Diversey, 1 hour." A beat. "Is everything okay?" 1 hour, I repeated, and hung up. I forwarded every file to my attorney. I printed the key pieces because paper has a way of insisting on its own reality. I tucked them into a folder and slipped that into my bag. I checked the locks. I checked the mirror and found a face I recognized but didn't want to inhabit. I went anyway. He arrived with the wrong smile, the one he used on airline agents and new clients. He kissed the air near my cheek and reached for my hands. I pulled them back and laid the folder on the table. "What is this?" he asked, playing innocent as if it were an instrument he'd mastered. 4 years, I said, opening to the marriage certificate. San Antonio de Padua. Color left his face like a tide. Then, like a good actor, he got it back. "Rafaela?" he said, shrugging. "We were kids. It's complicated." "It's legal," I said, calm and ongoing. He skimmed faster. The bank statements, the chats, Michaela's name. He flicked his eyes to the door as if she might materialize to rescue him. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice into the register that had once made me feel safe. "This is not what you think. It's an arrangement. People do this. It's practical. You get a partner who will never leave you. I get a chance to work where my skills matter. Rafaela gets to be imported like a second shipment?" I asked. My voice surprised me. Flat, measured. The part of me that mourned was not invited to this conversation. Something hard flashed in his eyes. "Don't be dramatic," he said. "You knew." "No," I said. "I loved you. That is not a contract to commit a crime." He leaned in, the mask dropping with an audible click. "If you report this, you will be investigated. Do you understand? Your career, your clean little reputation. They will not assume innocence. You will drown in the same water." "I've already spoken to an attorney," I said, "and I've already filed the report." For a moment, it was like watching a building realize its foundations were sand. His lips parted, his breath hitched. Then, rage found him like a custom suit. "Catalina," he said, venom slick on the name. "That jealous—" "Stop," I said, soft and absolute. "This isn't about Catalina, or culture, or my country. It's about your choices." He stared at me as if he could will me back into the person who would hand him a future without a receipt. When that didn't work, he stood so fast his chair tipped and clapped the floor. Every head turned. "You ruined everything," he said, and for the first time I believed him. Not because it was true, but because it was the closest he'd come to honesty. He left. I didn't watch him go. At my attorney's office, we compiled the recording with Rafaela, the screenshots, the social posts, the colleague's confirmation, Catalina's testimony, which she'd promised to formalize that afternoon. We stamped time on every piece and sent the report through the channels that put case numbers on what had been, for 48 hours, a private collapse. Evening came without ceremony. I changed my locks. I changed my phone number. I made tea and forgot to drink it. When I finally slept, I dreamed of airport arrival boards, flipping names to hold. In the morning, my attorney's email was waiting. "CBP has been notified. If Rafaela travels with documents, they'll coordinate. Do not meet Adrian alone. Do not respond to unknown numbers." The sky outside was the gray of a fresh erasure. I stood in it and felt something simple and fierce, like a wire pulling tight and then, impossibly, holding. The next 72 hours felt like they existed outside time. Every hour had its own gravity. Emails from lawyers, calls from agencies, a silence from Adrian that wasn't really silence but strategy. By Monday morning, I'd learned that strategy by heart. The first phase is distance. Let the mark doubt herself. The second is desperation. Flood her with charm before she gets too far. The third is damage control. I was already in phase 3. The knock on my door came at 9:07 a.m. 3 sharp raps. I looked through the peephole and saw the same suit he'd worn at the rehearsal dinner. Tie missing. Hair perfectly imperfect. Adrian. I didn't open it. "You're trespassing," I said through the door. "I just want to talk." His voice was softer now, threaded with contrition. "Please, Aniran, you're not answering my calls. Catalina lied to you. She's been jealous since we were kids." "She didn't make up your marriage certificate," I said. "Or the transfers. Or Rafaela." He pressed his hand flat to the door, palm up, as if the gesture itself could overwrite documents. "I can explain." "You've already explained," I said. "To Rafaela, to Michaela, to your family. You just didn't know I was listening." The silence that followed was almost kind. Then his voice hardened. "If you think you can fix this by running to the government, you don't understand how the world works." I understand how integrity works, I said, and how evidence works. You might want to start understanding how consequences do. He stepped back from the door, a laugh catching in his throat like a misfired line. You'll regret this, he said. I already do. After he left, I sent a short message to my attorney. He came to my apartment. I didn't engage. The reply came back instantly. Good. Keep a record. They'll want every detail. That afternoon, Catalina met me in a park, halfway between our apartments. The wind was raw enough to make conversation brief. She had a manila envelope tucked under her arm. Copies of everything, she said. Screenshots, messages, call logs. Rafaela's statement is in there too. She's cooperating. You shouldn't have to do this, I said. She looked at me, eyes darker than I remembered. Neither should you. For a moment, we just stood there, the betrayed and the betrayer's sister, bound by a strange kind of grief. Then she asked, What will you do now? I'm waiting for the agency to confirm the case file. My attorney said once the fraud report is officially logged, the investigation becomes theirs. And Adrian? I won't see him again. She nodded. Good. Then, after a pause, you should know, Rafaela's planning to fly to Chicago. She says she has more proof, financial documents, messages between Adrian and Michaela about the plan. My stomach tightened. Does she know what happens when she lands? She does, Catalina said. She wants to hand it over in person. That night, I barely slept. My phone pulsed with new emails, case numbers, contact names, words like intake, fraud unit, liaison, bureaucracy as a slow kind of mercy. By Friday, things began moving faster. My attorney called with the tone people use when news is both good and surreal. Rafaela's on her way, she said. Customs has been alerted. She's volunteering evidence. Homeland Security's preparing an interview. And Adrian? He and Michaela booked flights from Miami to meet her, she said. They don't know she's cooperating. The irony landed like thunder. The three of them, converging at an airport under the illusion of control. Saturday morning, I woke to another message from my lawyer. They're here. Stand by. Hours crawled. I tried reading, cleaning, anything that wasn't waiting. At noon, the call came. It's over, my attorney said. Customs detained all three. Rafaela handed over marriage and financial records. Adrian's visa revoked on the spot. Michaela's status under review. None of them are under arrest yet, but administrative detention will hold them until the hearings start. I pressed the phone to my chest. Relief didn't feel like triumph. It felt like static draining from my body after months of being charged. What happens next? I asked. Paperwork mostly. You'll need to give a formal statement and change your locks if you haven't already. I did, I said. Adrian called once more that evening from an unknown number. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail I never listened to. I deleted it, then emptied the trash. By Sunday, news had reached everyone. Our families, mutual friends, the guests who'd once expected a wedding. My mother called crying. My father sounded proud in the way only fathers do when their child survives something he can't fix. Catalina texted, They're holding them separately. Rafaela's fine. Thank you for not turning away when I told you. I typed back, You saved me. I just listened. That night, for the first time in weeks, I cooked. Nothing elaborate, just rice, vegetables, the sound of something sizzling that wasn't a crisis. When I sat down to eat, the quiet felt earned. In the morning, my attorney's email waited like a final punctuation mark. Fraud confirmed. Case accepted. You're officially cleared of liability. I reread it twice. Then I deleted every photo of Adrian still stored on my drive and emptied the recycle bin. Watching those images vanish felt like a small, necessary death. Outside, the city kept its usual rhythm. Buses, wind, a child crying on the street below. Life moving forward. Indifferent and generous. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled, and realized that for the first time since the whisper at the rehearsal dinner, I was breathing without defense. What remained wasn't vengeance or relief. It was awareness, a kind of quiet that comes after a storm you didn't summon but survived anyway. The next steps would be hearings, testimony, endless forms, but those were logistics, not life. The life part began here, in the aftermath, with nothing left to hide behind. When I think about that week now, it feels like a film with muted sound, everything happening in motion, but my brain's still catching up to the subtitles. 2 days after the airport call, I sat in my attorney's downtown office with a cup of untouched tea while she briefed me on what had happened in sequence. Rafaela landed at O'Hare at 6:52 a.m. with a folder of evidence, every page numbered, highlighted, and time-stamped. Customs and Border Protection flagged her passport for secondary inspection and escorted her to a private interview room. Adrian and Michaela arrived at 7:35 a.m., expecting to meet her. They walked straight into the same room an hour later, only the roles were reversed. Rafaela cooperated fully. She handed over a marriage certificate, financial records, chat logs, and voice messages that outlined their plan. Adrian would secure permanent status through our marriage, divorce me quietly, then petition for her after 2 years. The money they made from the arrangement would be wired into joint Colombian accounts. Her cooperation changed the whole thing, my attorney said. It went from probable fraud to proven conspiracy. You're officially a witness, not a participant. The words should have felt like relief. Instead, they felt like the moment you remove armor and realize how heavy it had been. Where are they now? I asked. In administrative detention, she said. They'll likely be released under supervision while the hearings process. Their visas are suspended. Immigration fraud cases take months, sometimes years, but you're in the clear. I nodded, unable to stop picturing the airport. Adrian scanning the crowd for Rafaela, smiling that practiced smile, not realizing the next faces he'd see would be federal agents. By the third day, news had reached the small pockets of our social world. A friend texted, "Is it true?" I replied, "Yes. Don't ask for details." Another asked, "Do you regret saying yes to him in the first place?" I didn't answer. I spent the next week dismantling the last traces of our life. The wedding dress I'd stored at the tailor's, the deposits, the invitations I'd never mailed. I boxed up the things he'd left at my place, a sweater, a cologne bottle, a camera lens, and dropped them at the building's donation bin. It felt symbolic, but mostly it felt practical. On Friday, Catalina knocked on my door. She looked lighter but older, like someone who'd just finished running uphill for a mile. "Can I come in?" she asked. I nodded. She sat, looked around, and said, "They're gone." Gone? Rafaela's been allowed to return to Colombia. Her testimony earned her cooperation credit. Adrian and Michaela will face deportation hearings, but they won't stay here long. The evidence was too strong. I didn't ask how she knew. She had family in every room of that story. "Does your family blame you?" I asked. "Some of them," she admitted. "My father says I should have stayed quiet, but my mother understands. She cried when she found out what he'd done. Not for him, for you." That broke something in me I hadn't realized was still intact. "Thank you," I said, voice raw. Catalina shrugged. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because people like him don't stop until someone stops them." We sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that doesn't demand conversation. Before leaving, she placed an envelope on the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Proof that good things can come from the worst decisions," she said. "Open it later." After she left, I did. Inside was a photo of her and her wife, standing in front of a small house in Bogota, holding hands. On the back she'd written, "We're adopting a baby girl. Her name will be Helena." That night I slept for 8 straight hours. No dreams, no adrenaline, just sleep. The next morning, my attorney called again. CBP asked if you'd be willing to give a statement for their fraud prevention campaign. Anonymized, of course. Your case could help others spot the signs early. I thought about it for a long moment. "Yes," I said finally. "If it keeps someone else from going through this, yes." The following week, I sat in a sterile conference room with a small recording device on the table. The agent asked me to describe the first time something didn't feel right. I told them about the rehearsal dinner, about Catalina's whisper, about the note with a Colombian number and the handwriting that trembled, but told the truth. When it was over, the agent said quietly, "You'd be surprised how many cases start with someone brave enough to listen." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But you did." As I left, I walked past a window that looked down over the city. The glass reflected a skyline that had survived worse than heartbreak. In the months that followed, hearings began. The first was Adrian's removal proceeding. I wasn't required to attend, but Catalina did. She told me afterward that when the judge read the findings, Adrian didn't say a word. He just stood there, pale and perfect, as though disbelief could reverse a verdict. By spring, Michaela's permanent residency was revoked and she was deported alongside him. Rafaela stayed in Colombia, reportedly working again, her evidence sealing their fate. I didn't celebrate. There was no victory in any of it, just closure that felt like exhaling after holding your breath too long. Months passed. My work took over. Life began to grow around the ruins. I spoke at one small seminar about digital verification in immigration cases. The irony wasn't lost on me. Catalina and I kept in touch. Sometimes she'd send photos of Helena. Sometimes we'd talk about how people can be both brilliant and broken at once. One evening, she said something that stuck with me. "You didn't just save yourself, Anurin. You broke a cycle." I didn't correct her, though part of me wondered if cycles ever really break, or if we just step out of their orbit long enough to see their shape. The next morning, I found myself walking by the lake, the sky bruised pink, the water reflecting a new day I hadn't asked for but somehow deserved. For the first time in a long while, I let myself think of the future, not as a risk to manage, but as a horizon I could move toward. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, I moved apartments. Same city, different skyline. The kind of place where nobody knows your story unless you decide to tell it. The air smelled cleaner there, or maybe that was just what distance felt like. The headlines around the case had faded by then. Immigration court decisions, deportation orders, they all read the same after a while. A formality recorded in some digital vault. But for me, every update still came with a pulse. My attorney called one morning to confirm what I already suspected. "It's official," she said. "Adrian's deportation order has been signed. 10-year entry ban. Michaela too. And Rafaela? She's cooperating from Colombia, free of charges. Her evidence helped uncover a wider fraud network. Apparently Adrian wasn't their first or last project." That part stunned me. He'd been a cog, not the architect. I'd built a whole nightmare around him when he was just one strand in something bigger. Somehow that made it worse, and better. When the call ended, I opened my laptop and wrote a short line in my notes app. He was a lesson, not a legacy. Then I closed it and went for a walk. Life had started stitching itself back together in small ways. I had new projects at work, mostly focused on helping international startups navigate cyber compliance. Ironically, many of them tied to immigration data protection. It felt like a strange form of redemption, turning the wreckage into a firewall for someone else. Catalina and I spoke often. She and her wife had officially adopted baby Helena, and they'd send photos every few weeks. Tiny hands, half smiles, the kind of normalcy that feels like proof of grace. One night, she called me unexpectedly. "I wanted you to know," she said. "The embassy reached out. They're starting to use parts of your case as a training example." "That's surreal," I said. "I know," she said, laughing softly. "But it means what you did mattered. It's helping people spot this before it happens." I didn't do much. "You listened," she said simply. "Most people don't." Her words stayed with me. Listening had cost me almost everything I thought I wanted, but it had given me back something bigger: discernment. A few weeks later, I met someone new. His name was Julian, a legal analyst working for the state attorney's office. We met at a cybersecurity conference, both of us escaping from the world of too much coffee and too little sleep. He asked about my background. I told him the professional parts. He didn't press for the rest. By our third coffee, I told him everything: the fraud, the near marriage, the investigation, the fear. He listened without pity or curiosity, just quiet understanding. When I finished, he smiled slightly. "That's one hell of a penetration test," he said. "You survived a social engineering attack most people never see coming." I laughed harder than I expected to. Humor, after all that, felt like oxygen. As months turned into a year, life steadied. The nightmares stopped. I started mentoring junior women in my field, teaching them not just how to secure systems, but how to recognize the soft breaches in people. Catalina visited Chicago again that spring. We sat by the river, watching the tour boats pass, and she told me that Rafaela had remarried, to a teacher this time. "She says she feels free for the first time," Catalina said. "And Adrian?" I asked, not because I cared, but because the curiosity was part of the scar. "Back in Bogota," she said, "working under someone else's name. My father cut him off. My mother still prays for him." I didn't wish him ill, I just didn't wish him anything. Indifference, I learned, is quieter than forgiveness, but more powerful. That summer, my firm launched a nonprofit initiative for victims of immigration scams. My name didn't appear anywhere publicly, but I helped build the tech infrastructure. Secure channels for whistleblowers, verification training modules. Catalina contributed as an advisor. At the launch, my supervisor said something that stuck. Sometimes prevention looks like paperwork, but it's really empathy in disguise. Empathy. That word had once felt like a weakness. Now it felt like armor. 2 years later, Catalina sent me another message. We're moving to Canada. Helena's starting school. If you ever visit, there's a guest room waiting. I told her I would, and I meant it. 3 years after the almost wedding, I stood on a conference stage in DC, delivering a talk titled Trust but Verify: Digital Ethics in a Borderless World. When it ended, a young analyst approached me. "That story you told," she said, "about the engagement fraud, was that you?" I smiled. It was someone I used to be. Now, 5 years later, I can say it plainly. I survived being rewritten by someone else's lie, and I wrote myself back. Adrian is a ghost in a story that no longer haunts me. Catalina is family. Julian and I have built something real. No performance, no paperwork pretending to be love. Just quiet mornings and shared passwords and the relief of nothing to hide. People sometimes ask if I've forgiven him. I tell them forgiveness isn't the same as permission. I don't need to absolve him to move on. The truth is simpler. What almost destroyed me became the foundation of everything I now trust. And sometimes the most important wedding isn't the one that happens. It's the one you walk away from.